And joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Sigurd Neubauer, former non-resident fellow, the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, and the author of The Gulf Region and Israel, Old Struggles, New Alliances. And Sigurd, we have Saudi Arabia apparently officially announcing today it will allow Israeli overflights on flights to the Gulf. How much, just let's start with Saudi Arabia, how much, if any more, can we expect from Saudi Arabia to maybe make some kind of move or concessions towards normalization with Israel, even in the last little under 2 months of the Trump administration?
Well, that is clearly what Jared Kushner is trying to achieve in his trip to the region right now. I think that if you look broader at the state of Saudi-Israeli affairs, we saw that just last week, Prime Minister Netanyahu met with the Saudi Crown Prince. So all the building blocks that are needed for Saudi Arabia and Israel to normalize relations are already there. The public support appears to be for it, both in Riyadh and in Jerusalem, certainly, and also here in Washington. The question is, of course, will Crown Prince Mohammed have the political will that is necessarily to cross that threshold? Whether or not he will do that as a departing gift to President Trump for all that he has done for Saudi Arabia, or whether he will use that as leverage with the incoming Biden administration to generate some goodwill in Washington, we don't know quite as of yet. But all the ingredients for a strategic shift between Saudi Arabia and Israel is certainly there.
Right. Now let's move on to Qatar, because when we talk about diplomatic breakthroughs, the focus has been on with Israel and the Arab states, the Gulf states. But the Trump administration also has said it wanted to resolve this dispute between Qatar and the other Gulf states, primarily Saudi Arabia, something that also could conceivably bring Qatar within the circle, let's say, of those states in the Gulf moving towards normalization with Israel. How much of a chance do you think Kushner has to make some headway in that rift there before Trump leaves office?
Well, I think for Jared Kushner and his team at the White House, I think that the dispute between Qatar and its neighbors has been a very difficult issue to overcome, because we know that the crisis between Washington's Gulf partners was a manufactured crisis based on allegations that were not true. And the rift as such was not needed, especially when the Trump administration sought to bring the Gulf states and Israel together to confront Iran. From that perspective, there was no need for a Gulf rift. But the Trump administration, after it had to deal with that geopolitical challenge, has really, for the past 3 years, pushed for a solution to this crisis. And I think that it is something that Jared Kushner feels strongly about to resolve it. And I think that there is some momentum precisely because the expert community and the international community, including Israel, wants to see this crisis resolved. So I think that the question is, how do you get from all that momentum and convince the parties to put their disputes behind them? I think that that's the challenge, and that's of course also what Jared Kushner is trying to do in the region now.
Right, and it certainly would be interesting to see Qatar, as I said before, move back into that circle of the so-called moderate Sunni states, and maybe take steps towards upgrading relations with Israel. That would be interesting. Sigurd Neubauer, thank you for joining us from Washington, D.C.